Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to take us back to the American Civil War and show you one of the games that I find a really interesting treatment of the naval dimension to this conflict. So of course I'm speaking of James Day's Iron and Oak. Now, I don't know how familiar a title this will be to many of you because it's been around for quite a while now, exactly 10 years to be precise. It was published in 2013. I don't know how much acclaim it got at the time, but I find it a fascinating treatment of the naval side of the American Civil War. And despite the box art, which admittedly is a very nice picture of the Monitor and the Virginia duking it out. It's not just a game that deals with ironclads, it's a game which deals with all sorts of vessels which fought in the American Civil War, from the mighty ironclads all the way down to the diminutive Davids and the spar torpedo boats. Now, this game is primarily tactical in nature, and that's one of the things I find quite interesting about it because it is a simple game, as we'll see over the course of this series. And when it comes to the American Civil War's naval battles and the attempts to represent them in war game form, it's one of those conflicts that presents designers with a lot of interesting challenges, and mainly because the nature of naval warfare in this conflict was such that it's very hard to make it engaging. I mean, let's take the example of the very well-known duel between the Monitor and the Virginia. You've got these two ships that circle each other pretty much for hours, generally ineffectively bouncing shell off each other. Now, how do you make a game like that engaging? Because I mean, of course, your grognards and people who are very interested in the period won't mind that. They love that sort of detail, and I mean, I freely admit I enjoy the challenges of an ironclad on ironclad engagement. But when you've got the casually interested person who might want to know a bit more, what is the solution? And I think James Day's approach is a very interesting one because this game treads a fine line between the ultra detailed tactical rules. So I suppose a good example of the latter, the old Yakinto game Ironclads, or more recently from the 1990s, there were miniature rule sets like Smoke on the Water. Those are very great rule sets, but some of them are incredibly detailed, down to the point where, as with many advanced naval games, you're writing down orders for your ships before you implement them simultaneously on your turn. Some of them take the level of detail so far that you almost wonder whether you should be recording what time you're supposed to tell the tell your crew to start preparing their coffee every morning. It takes it down to that level. Other designers have taken it to the opposite end of the scale. I mean, GMT again is a great example because it's this company that published Rebel Raiders on the High Seas, which is a grand strategic overview of the naval side of the American Civil War. And you get whole battles just resolved by dice rolls and cross-referencing a few tables. So a very quick summary. So how does Iron and Oak sort of navigate a course between the shoal waters of these different approaches? Well, those of you who have seen my review of the Kaiser's Pirates, which elsewhere on this channel, will have seen that example of James Day's work. And he has taken his concept of opposed dice rolls and ported it into the American Civil War. So what you can see there is a ship data card, and unlike other games pertaining to this subject, you can see that I mean, there's not much of anything at all that looks like hull ratings or any of the traditional data you'd expect to see. I mean, there's some basic information in tabular format, a few symbols, and lots of strange graphics. Now, I'll tell you now, these represent dice. And essentially, the core of this game rests upon the opposed dice roll systems you see in the Kaiser's Pirates, applied to the American Civil War. But would it be fair to call this a simple reskinning? I'm going to argue no, because a lot of thought has gone into this. And as you can see, unlike the Kaiser's Pirates, which does not have much in the way of damage detail, you've got an awful lot of counters that come with this game, dealing with very specific types of damage, very specific things that affect ship systems. You can see from the obstacles and the submerged torpedoes, we'd call them mines today, but in the American Civil War they were torpedoes, hence damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. So there's a lot under the surface which gives you a very compelling narrative of what actually happens to these ships when they fight it out. You also have, and I've got to hand it to GMT's art department here, you have these really beautiful and, as far as I can tell, broadly accurate silhouettes of the ships involved. So what do you get inside the box? I mean, these components look great. Visually, they're very stunning. Let me just wrestle this thing open and I'll show you what you get inside it. So in no particular order, here are a couple of the ship reference cards. Now these sit at each player's end of the table and act purely as their off-map reference for the ship. As you can see, the cards are fairly large, the cards pretty decent stuff. And I've just picked up a couple at random. So we've got the USS Southfield, which was an unarmored gunboat, and we've got the CSS Tuscaloosa, which was an ironclad. And just to show you what is going on here, what these stats mean, obviously you've got name, nationality, points value. That is the ship's maneuverability rating, 3 levels as they're affected by damage. You've also got the total hits the vessel can absorb before it sinks. That is a measure of the crew size. So the number over there on the towards the right-hand side of the card is the total crew. The first figure after the colon is the threshold you reach to suffer light casualties. Anything higher than that and your crew has suffered heavy casualties. Sorry, I'll just make sure my pile isn't falling over. And then you've got the draft. Now draft is important because the American Civil War is very often a riverine conflict, so the threat of running aground, especially if you're a fairly chunky ship like this one, you do have to watch yourself. The rest of it is simply a very, very basic summary, visually presented, of the various locations of the ship that can be hit, how strong its armor is. The blue 10 is basically a D10, a 10-sided dice. Its unarmored deck, if it's hit by plunging fire or anything else that happens to sort of skim across its unprotected horizontal surfaces, they're a bit weaker, they get an 8. You can see it's color-coded for the bits of the ship that are exposed wood and the bits that are protected by iron armor. Then lastly, you get that graphic there. That is the ship's artillery power, basically condensed into a D6. That's its gunnery value. The yellow circle around it shows that it has limited guns. So, I mean, the Tuscaloosa is a well-protected ship, but not a very heavily armed armed one. And those are the penalties for firing outside the bow and stern arcs, respectively. So, I mean, I'll just compare her with the Southfield. The thing that I think is great about this system is you can see at a glance the relative virtues and defects of the two ships. And in the Southfield's case, let's hope I have enough hands, you can see that she is more suitable for blockade duty, having a bit more endurance than a purpose-built short-range ironclad. That symbol denotes that her crew is susceptible to grape shot fire at close range, unlike the armoured Tuscaloosa, which is not. Her woefully unprotected wooden sides. I mean, that's a D6. So when you're doing opposed dice rolls of, imagine Tuscaloosa had heavier guns if she had something like a D8 or a D10. And before you even get to the gunnery modifiers, that's not a healthy comparison at all. But as you can also see, one benefit that the Southfield has is that she packs some pretty heavy ordnance, much greater than the Tuscaloosa's hitting power. So you can see at a glance what the strengths and weaknesses of the two sides' ships are, and that can be quite helpful in its own way. You also get a fairly large stack of maneuver cards, ship order cards, and these are great because they take what's normally a very complicated process in many American Civil War naval games, and they condense it into a series of orders which you can give your ships. You have lots of options. So a maneuver 0, for instance, it doesn't move you out of your grid on the map, but you can perform a specific type of order. So in this case, a spar or ram attack, or if you play it the other way, you can attempt to cross your enemy's T. If you're a bit further away, you can play the card either as a maneuver 2. If you're a faster ship, you have a higher chance of doing this, or as a maneuver 1. I mean, as I say, this is great. It's so simple. In many other very worthy American Civil War naval games, you're laboriously writing how many inches forward, then how many degrees you want to turn to port, then how many, realistic, but time consuming. With this, you just select your order card, place it next to your ship card, and off you go. And as I say, there are many of them, so you can have some fairly significant multi-ship actions in this game, and the infrastructure is there to support them. Now, I won't linger on the counters too much because you saw samples of them on the back of the box, and I know they don't show up very well with the lighting and through the cardboard, but you have a lot of Union ships, unsurprisingly. You have somewhat fewer Confederate ones, but there's still quite a lot in there. So, potential for creating a lot of battles. And what I said earlier about that granular detail being woven very skillfully into what's at heart a very basic game mechanic of opposed dice rolls. Here's what I call the bag of misery, which is all the things that can go wrong with your ship as it takes hits or runs aground or catches fire or suffers breakdowns. All the things that plagued Civil War commanders historically are right there to delight you or make you bury your head in your hands and cry. Somewhat more morbidly, there's the crew casualty markers. Shoal depth markers, that's another great subtlety of this game. You get variations in the shoal depths, and if you're playing a deep water or sea scenario, you simply don't bother with these blue number counters. Other markers are for density of smoke. The longer you fire your guns, the more sustained your fire, the lower the visibility will get. And inevitably damage markers, physical damage to the hull, damage to its armor. You even have grades of crew, everything from green all the way up to elite, which I think is another nice wrinkle. It affects the way your ships perform. And then, of course, there's the obstacle, because there are many missions in this game where inevitably the Union is trying to crack open Confederate defenses. Bag of dice. You can't have an opposed dice roll system without giving people a significant bag of dice. And action cards. Now, these represent various advantages you can have during the course of a game. Unlike a lot of games, you don't actually use most of these in a battle. You're dealt a starting hand at the beginning of an action, and that's pretty much all you've got. Those, anything between 4 to 6 cards. And They give you little options during the battle. Some of them increase your gun power, some of them reduce your opponent's maneuverability. There are nasty ones, like under certain conditions, you can force an enemy to strike their colors. You can attempt to screen a friendly ship. There's a card for almost every occasion, but the slightly frustrating thing is, I would say a good 8 times out of 10, you never quite get the action card you want. And you only have 3 chances to discard and draw a replacement for cards that you can't use over the course of the game. Now, if you're one of those people who want to get involved in a campaign game, this game serves campaigns very well. It's not just about individual missions. You have Navy Yard cards, which can be used to upgrade your ships as your crew gets more experience, your ships become more battle hardened. And you can also affect the quality of your Navy Yard as well. So that I'm just picking the first card in that deck. There's fast repair, so quicker turnaround for your damaged warships, and or if you're the Confederates, commerce raiders, blockade runners, what have you. What have we got next? There's a lot in this box. The map. The map is a model of simplicity. Now, again, I find naval warfare as it's represented for the American Civil War tends to, meander between 2 extremes. You either get very dense hex maps, or you just get the classic miniatures of approach of, maybe that thing behind me. This is our battlefield, and we'll just move across it, measuring off in inches or centimeters. But this is a very, sorry, I went blocking myself. This, as you can see, is a very abstracted approach to the whole business, where your map is divided into basically rectangular grids. And there's very little info on the map. It's very uncluttered. I like that. So you have your turn track, you have your shoal depths, there's boxes for marking player sides, and there's also other boxes along the main bit of the board for marking whether it's a riverbank or open sea or coastline. Essentially, you're given a blank template and you can use the counters supplied with the game to fill it out, which I think is great. You've got a one map fits all, which is fantastic. What else have we got? Never go anywhere without your player aids. There are 2 excellent cardstock player aids, both identical, so you've each got the one. And they take you through the myriads of modifiers that are essential in a game dealing with the relatively complex, on a scale of trireme to HMS Queen Elizabeth, I'd say they're complex enough. A lot could go wrong with these ships, both in the course of routine operations or in the heat of battle. And as you can see, the sequence of play is actually remarkably short and simple. But what you need all of this for is to quantify precisely what happens when you make these opposed dice rolls for everything from the movement of your ship to the firing of your guns to your attempts to repair your damage. Everything is opposed. You don't just straightforwardly do what you want to do. And I think that's great because it models the uncertainties of these brand new ships that were being put through combat situations without what we would consider a decent working up period most of the time. And I like the way that system injects an element of uncertainty. Now, I realize that is a personal thing to me, and you can make up your own minds over the course of the next video as you see me play through a scenario. But I'll just finish off with the last 2 things in the box. There is, of course, a nice rule book, short and sweet, decent index. There's not actually that much to the rules. A lot of it is explanations of cases, what happens if this result is rolled, what happens if you get a particular type of damage. It's fairly well summarized and well explained. But the thicker book is the playbook, because you get all sorts of goodies in here. You get some very familiar names on the battle scenarios. I don't know how well you can see that, but take my word for it, there's some good stuff there. You get a lot of information about how to play a campaign and how to generate your own battles within a campaign if you want to randomly generate situations. I mean, if you wanted to, you could you could coast hop down the Atlantic, sealing off the Confederacy's ports, or keeping them open, your preference. Or you could slug your way up or down the Mississippi, depending on which way you are wanting to do it. So much replayability. And the scenarios are very beautifully explained and very beautifully laid out. I mean, Trent's Reach, list of ships, map layout, couple of special rules, off you go. This is a game that's designed to be played quickly, and as we see, it does pretty well at that. The last and really sweet bit about it, other than the cool campaign log they let you copy, is the link to another game in the series. So GMT have, having released Rebel Raiders on the high seas, have provided a mechanism whereby these two games can be linked so that you can use Rebel Raiders to do all the high level grand strategy stuff. But if it takes your fancy, as engagements occur, everything from intercepting blockade runners to full scale naval battles at places like Mobile Bay, or the fall of New Orleans, that campaign, you can hop from the grand strategic view presented by Rebel Raiders and zoom in using Iron and Oak for a more tactical experience. And I love that. I mean, okay, yes, commercially it's a great way of getting people like me to buy both games, and it worked. Well done, GMT, good call. But I think it's brilliant and a great way of marrying up two very different systems. But I realise I've gone on quite a bit relative to the amount of time I usually spend gassing on an introductory video. So that is our introduction to Iron and Oak. Thank you very much for watching this video and for following the channel and this series generally. My next one will be a playthrough of one of the scenarios in this game. There are optional rules to increase the realism even further, but I'll choose a scenario that just sticks with the basics, just to give you a good sense of how the game plays. So I will look forward to seeing you all in that one. Thanks again for tuning in, for your company, which is always welcome. Really good to see you guys. And I shall see you on one of the major waterways of this war, maybe even one outside the United States territorial waters. You never know. But find out what I'm about to do in the next video, which I hope to be uploading in the next day or two. Thank you very much for tuning in. Good to see you all, and bye for now.